The massive space station loomed in front of Commander Jenna Carter and her crew, its gleaming structure orbiting a distant star. Humanity's first real introduction to the greater galaxy felt both exhilarating and humbling. The station was a hub of activity, bustling with alien species from all corners of the universe. Yet, despite the diversity of life and technology surrounding them, humanity's presence felt small, almost invisible. As the human fleet docked, the crew exchanged nervous glances. Their ships, sleek and agile, but no match for the colossal warships of the Coalition, seemed laughable in comparison. Carter had led this mission with pride, but she couldn't help but feel the weight of the challenge ahead. The Coalition, the united force of numerous advanced alien species, held dominion over much of the galaxy. They were powerful, and their fleets were massive. Ships the size of entire planets, bristling with weapons and defensive systems, were commonplace. "Stay focused," Carter said, standing at the front of the crew bay. "We've earned our place here. We belong. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." The crew nodded, though there was a palpable sense of doubt in the air. The humans were newcomers, and many of the alien species aboard the station didn't hide their disdain for them. Humans were known for their resilience, but that didn't always translate to respect in the eyes of the powerful. They were met by a delegation of aliens, including the Zorath, tall, insectoid beings whose mandibles clicked with irritation, and the Devorians, a sleek, reptilian species with scales that shimmered like liquid metal. The Zorath leader, Zethra, gave Carter a sharp, dismissive nod, while the Devorian representative, Zalzar, barely acknowledged her presence, his eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and condescension. "We've been informed of your arrival, humans," Zethra's voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "Though your technology is, rudimentary, we shall see how it fares among more developed forces." Carter clenched her fists, fighting back the urge to respond with anger. She had trained her entire life for this moment. Her crew had worked tirelessly to earn this opportunity, and here she was, being treated like an inferior species. "Rudimentary," she replied, keeping her voice steady, but her tone firm. "You'd be surprised what humanity is capable of." Zethra sneered but said nothing further. Zalzar, however, stepped forward, his cold gaze scanning Carter with sharp interest. "Your fleet will join the construction of the Galactic Defense Armada," he said, his voice silky, like the sound of hissing steam. "However, we don't expect much from you. After all, your ships are hardly fit to stand alongside the Zorath or Devorian warships." "We'll prove ourselves," Carter said, her voice unshaken. She would prove them wrong. Humanity's size might not compare, but their ingenuity, adaptability, and spirit had always been their strongest weapons. Zethra turned sharply and motioned for the crew to follow. They passed through the bustling halls of the station, observing alien species interacting with ease, languages unfamiliar to the humans, their manners and customs alien to everything they knew. Humanity's small contribution, a fleet of light warships, was hardly noticeable among the vast fleet of planet-sized ships in the station's docking bays. As Carter and her crew were led to their designated quarters, she allowed herself a brief moment to absorb the overwhelming size and scale of it all. But there was no time for hesitation. She knew that for humanity to be taken seriously, they had to show that size didn't matter. They would have to do what they did best: outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlast. Their survival depended on it. She gathered her crew for a briefing that evening. The tension was thick in the air, but Carter's resolve was unwavering. If the aliens thought humanity would cower, they were about to learn a valuable lesson. "This is our chance," she said, looking each of them in the eyes. "We've been underestimated, but I know we can prove that human ingenuity is something no one can ignore. Let's make sure they regret ever doubting us." The human fleet had barely finished docking before they were summoned to the command deck of the galactic station. The massive room was filled with alien officers, each species more intimidating than the last, all gathered to oversee the first test of humanity's worth in the grand galactic scheme. Commander Carter stood at the front of the room, trying to maintain her composure as the alien representatives eyed her fleet with skepticism. Their massive warships were docked nearby, looming like monolithic giants in comparison to the sleek, smaller human ships. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the location of an incoming threat, a fleet of marauders that had been causing havoc across multiple systems. The Marauders, a brutal and unpredictable faction, were known for their unorthodox tactics and disregard for conventional warfare. As the aliens debated the best course of action, it became clear that their planet-sized ships would be of little use in this engagement. "This is a job for smaller, more maneuverable ships," Exalzar, the Duvorian representative, said with a slight sneer. "If the humans have anything worth offering, it would be in speed and agility." Carter could feel the weight of his words, but she refused to let it show. This was the moment she had been waiting for. If humanity was going to earn its place among these alien civilizations, it was now or never. "We'll take the lead," Carter said, her voice steady but commanding. "Our fleet is built for precision, for swift strikes and adaptability. We'll outmaneuver them and take them down before they can even react." The aliens exchanged dubious glances, but Carter wasn't looking for their approval. She turned to her crew, who had gathered around the briefing table. "We've trained for this. We know our ships inside and out. I need all of you focused, ready to respond to anything the enemy throws at us. We're not just fighting for victory today. We're fighting to prove that we belong here." The crew nodded in agreement, the resolve on their faces clear. Humanity's small, nimble warships, each barely a fraction of the size of the alien vessels, had been built for speed and precision. With advanced engines, cutting-edge shields, and a weapons system that prioritized accuracy, they were the antithesis of the lumbering behemoths that made up the bulk of the galactic fleet. As they prepped for departure, Carter's mind raced with possibilities. Could they really pull this off? The Marauders were no pushovers. But if the human fleet could get the first strike in, they might just have a chance. The human ships powered up and broke away from the station, their sleek forms gliding into the vast emptiness of space. Carter took a deep breath as she stared out at the view from the bridge. Ahead, the Marauder fleet was closing in, an ugly mess of warships, unpredictable and dangerous. The Duvorian fleet followed behind them at a slow pace, clearly not eager to engage without a clear plan. "Let's move fast," Carter ordered. "We can't afford to let them get comfortable." The human fleet split into smaller groups, each led by one of the experienced commanders. Carter was with the main force, steering the flagship as it darted through the stars. She knew the aliens were watching closely, waiting for them to fail, but she couldn't afford to think about that now. The Marauders were closing in fast, and the moment of truth was here. "Targeting systems locked," her weapons officer reported. "We're in range, Commander." "Now," Carter ordered, her heart pounding. The human fleet surged forward, each ship firing in coordinated bursts. The Marauder ships, massive and unpredictable, scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. The humans were already weaving in and out of their formation, striking at weak points with deadly accuracy. Explosions erupted as the human ships disabled the Marauders' forward defenses, their agility allowing them to strike at critical points the larger ships couldn't reach. Carter's hands gripped the control panel as her ship weaved between incoming fire, the shield systems flickering with each near miss. The aliens, who had expected humanity to falter, watched in stunned silence as the Marauder fleet began to crumble. Human tactics, quick, precise, and brutal, were tearing through the Marauders' ranks, and within minutes, the battle was shifting in their favor. "We got them on the run," Carter said, her voice barely hiding the satisfaction. But there was no time to relax. The Marauder flagship, an enormous vessel bristling with weapons, was still in the fight, its crew desperately trying to regroup. "Full speed ahead," Carter commanded. Her fleet followed suit, racing toward the flagship, determined to finish what they started. The aliens, still silent in their observation, were beginning to realize that humanity wasn't the weakling they had assumed. This was a species that could think on its feet, that could turn the tide of a battle with nothing but skill and determination. Carter's heart raced as the final moments of the battle approached. The Marauder flagship was heavily fortified, but the humans had one advantage: speed. And when the moment came, they struck. The flagship's engines flared, and within moments, it was a blazing wreck. Human ingenuity and precision had won the day. As the smoke cleared, Carter's fleet hovered above the shattered remains of the enemy flagship. There was no applause, no fanfare. But Carter didn't need it. The message had been sent. Humanity had just proven its worth, and the Galactic Coalition was now forced to take notice. The battle with the Marauder fleet had barely concluded when new orders came through. Commander Carter stood at the bridge of the flagship, her fingers drumming lightly against the console as the holographic map of the galaxy flickered to life. The Marauder forces had been crushed, but in their retreat, they had unleashed a new weapon, something even more dangerous. The Marauders have deployed a fleet of stealth ships. The voice of the intelligence officer crackled over the comm. They're unlike anything we've seen before. We estimate their numbers are substantial. If we don't act fast, they could wreak havoc across the system. Carter's pulse quickened. A stealth fleet could be a nightmare. These Marauder ships were designed to be nearly invisible, equipped with advanced cloaking technology that made them nearly undetectable. What should have been a decisive victory had turned into an even more complicated pursuit. Her crew was already in motion, moving with practiced efficiency. The alien commanders were less enthusiastic. Excelzar and Zethyrus stood to the side, their expressions unreadable. They had already questioned humanity's ability to handle such a task. "You do realize the magnitude of the situation, don't you?" Zethyrus' voice was laced with condescension. "Our fleets are designed for planetary defense, not chasing invisible ships across the galaxy." Carter's lips tightened. "Then it's a good thing we're here, isn't it?" She didn't wait for a response. With a final glance at her crew, she issued the orders. "Prepare for pursuit. We'll split into 3 groups. We need to find these ships before they can disappear again." The human fleet darted into action, breaking off into smaller formations, each one maneuvering into a formation designed to cover as much of the system as possible. Carter led the primary group, her flagship speeding toward the location where the Marauders had last been tracked. The fleet was tense, aware that any sign of the enemy could mean the difference between victory and disaster. "We're approaching the region where their ships were last detected," the tactical officer reported, his voice steady, though there was an underlying tension. No signs of movement yet. Carter scanned the endless void of space, watching for any signs of movement. The vastness of the space around them was unsettling. In the distance, stars shimmered and asteroids drifted lazily, but there was no sign of the Marauder ships. Their cloaking technology was working perfectly, or at least it seemed that way. "I want every sensor at maximum output," Carter commanded. "We know they're here somewhere. Let's find them before they have a chance to regroup." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Carter's mind raced with the possibilities. The Marauders could already be lying in wait, preparing an ambush. Or worse, waiting to launch an attack on an unsuspecting system. Humanity couldn't afford to let that happen. This wasn't just about proving their worth anymore. This was about survival. Then it came, just a flicker on the radar. A tiny shift in the sensor readings. It was almost unnoticeable, a tiny blip that could easily have been overlooked. But Carter's trained eyes caught it. "There," she barked. "They're hiding behind that asteroid field, just beyond the nebula." The human ships adjusted course, veering sharply toward the location. Carter's hands tightened around the controls, her heart pounding. The stealth ships were likely lying in wait, hoping to ambush them with overwhelming force. But they wouldn't have the luxury of surprise for long. "Activate the quantum scanners," Carter ordered. We're not giving them a chance to slip away. Her flagship emitted a pulse of energy as the quantum sensors came online. The readout on the display flickered, and for a brief moment, the invisible ships appeared, blips of data that had once been nothing but empty space. The cloaking devices couldn't hide them from the quantum frequency. A barrage of laser fire erupted from the Marauder ships as they were exposed. It was a trap, but it was too late. The human ships had already adapted, dodging the initial strike and returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. "Return fire," Carter shouted, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "Target their engines. We disable, not destroy." Her fleet moved with deadly precision, circling around the Marauder ships, dodging blasts and responding with perfect timing. The alien ships, large and slow, began to struggle as they tried to adapt to the humans' fluid, unpredictable movements. The human fleet was quick, agile, and relentless, striking with surgical precision at the Marauder ships' vulnerable points. Carter's flagship was engaged in a heated battle with the lead Marauder ship, its energy shields flickering under the onslaught of enemy fire. But Carter wasn't worried. She knew that if they could keep the pressure on, if they could just stay one step ahead, they would win. After a few more intense minutes of dogfights and evasive maneuvers, the first of the Marauder ships began to break apart, its engines failing after a direct hit from a human torpedo. One by one, the remaining ships fell, their cloaking devices failing in the face of constant bombardment. As the last Marauder ship exploded in a spectacular fireball, the human fleet held its position, panting with the intensity of the fight. Carter looked over at her crew, her heart swelling with pride. They had done it. Not just defeated the enemy, but outsmarted them. Once again, humanity had shown its mettle. "This is only the beginning," Carter muttered, a slight smile tugging at her lips. But there was no time to rest. The Coalition would need to know about this victory, and they would have to be prepared. The galaxy had just learned a crucial lesson: underestimate humanity at your own peril. The victory over the Marauder fleet had barely sunk in when the reports started coming in. Carter and her crew were still basking in the adrenaline rush of their triumph when a new, far more dangerous problem emerged. The unexpected success of the human fleet hadn't gone unnoticed, but it seemed to have triggered something far darker among the Galactic Coalition. As Carter reviewed the tactical data in her command center, a loud alarm suddenly blared, causing her to snap her attention to the control panel. Her heart sank. "Commander, we have a situation," her chief engineer, Lieutenant Samuels, said urgently. "There's a critical systems failure across all human ships. Engines, shields, weapons, almost every major system is failing simultaneously. It's like someone's tampered with our fleet." Carter froze. It couldn't be a coincidence. After their victory, it had seemed like humanity had earned some measure of respect, but now it was becoming clear that something darker was at play. Could there be a faction within the Coalition willing to sabotage humanity's fleet? A group threatened by their sudden success? "Run a full diagnostic," Carter ordered, already certain of what she would find. The engines sputtered and whined as they tried to remain functional, but it was obvious. The sabotage was deliberate. Every human ship, from the flagship to the smallest support vessels, was malfunctioning. Samuels tapped away at the controls. "It's as if someone has reprogrammed our core systems, Commander. I can isolate the signal, but I'll need time." "Do whatever it takes," Carter said, her voice steel cold. She turned to the crew, who were watching the developing situation with alarm. "We'll fight through this. Keep your heads cool." Despite her words, Carter's mind was racing. It was clear now. Someone on the inside didn't want the humans to succeed, didn't want them to prove their worth. This wasn't just a failure. It was sabotage. The question was who, and more importantly, why. The first clue came when a low-level officer, Lieutenant Harris, stepped forward with a worried look on his face. "Commander, the sabotage, it doesn't seem random. The signal appears to be coming from within the station itself. I believe someone has infiltrated the Coalition's systems." Carter felt a cold chill run down her spine. The station, a symbol of galactic unity, was supposed to be neutral ground. If someone within the coalition was trying to undermine humanity, it could mean disaster not just for her fleet, but for their standing in the galaxy. There was no time to waste. "Get to work, Harris," she said. "I need everything you can find on the saboteurs. The aliens will try to cover this up, but we'll expose whoever is behind this." The crew worked quickly, knowing that if they didn't solve the problem, the sabotage could leave them stranded in hostile space, vulnerable to attack from any number of threats. But every second counted, and with every system failure that occurred, the human ships grew more vulnerable. Meanwhile, Carter turned to the communications officer. "Can you raise the coalition leaders? I need answers." The officer hesitated. "I've been trying, Commander. The coalition's communication network is being obstructed." Another piece of the puzzle. Someone didn't just want to destroy the human fleet. They wanted to isolate humanity, prevent them from reaching out for help. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a conspiracy. Carter's thoughts raced. What if they were being framed? If the coalition could blame the sabotage on humanity, it would justify their expulsion from the alliance. They would be left without allies, surrounded by enemies. "Commander," Harris interjected, his voice tight with urgency, "I've traced the signal. It's coming from the Zorath embassy. Zethra is involved. I can't be sure, but it's too big a coincidence." Carter felt her blood run cold. Zethra had been one of the most vocal critics of humanity, mocking them at every turn. If anyone in the coalition had reason to sabotage the humans' fleet, it was him. But why? Was it just because of their victory? Or was there something more at play, something that humanity had yet to discover? Without wasting another moment, Carter made her decision. "We're going to confront him. Harris, gather everything you can. I want hard proof." The next few minutes felt like a blur. The human fleet was still dealing with mechanical issues, but Carter knew they couldn't afford to sit idly by. Zethra had to be confronted, and the truth had to come out, before it was too late. As the human ships limped toward the Zorath embassy on the station, Carter's mind raced with possibilities. She had to be careful. The Zorath were powerful, and if they caught wind of their investigation, it could lead to a diplomatic nightmare. But humanity's future depended on uncovering the truth. The doors to the Zorath embassy slid open with a hiss, revealing the tall, insectoid form of Zethra, his mandibles twitching in what could have been an amused gesture. His cold, calculating eyes met Carter's, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. "I was wondering when you would come to speak with me, Commander Carter," Zethra said smoothly, his voice full of a quiet, venomous edge. "I trust you've enjoyed your little victory, but all good things come to an end." Carter's gaze was unwavering. "Not this time, Zethra. We know what you've done." The silence in the Zorath embassy was deafening as Commander Carter locked eyes with Zethra. His mandibles twitched, but there was no sign of guilt, no indication that he had been caught. If anything, the Zorath leader seemed entirely too calm, like a predator who had lured its prey into a trap. "You're wasting your time," Zethra said coolly, his voice deep and measured. "I don't know what lies you've been told, but this is nothing more than a misunderstanding. You'll find no evidence here." Carter's jaw tightened. She couldn't afford to be swayed by his words. She had come too far, and her crew had worked too hard to prove humanity's place in the galaxy. But now, it seemed they were not only fighting external enemies, but also internal sabotage, a threat to their very existence. "I don't need lies, Zethra," she replied, her voice steady but sharp. "I have the evidence. The sabotage to our fleet came from within your embassy. The signals were traced directly back to you. You thought you could silence us, but you're wrong." Zethra's expression remained neutral, but Carter could see the slight tension in his posture. He wasn't used to being confronted so directly. Still, he refused to break. "You think you can accuse me of this and expect it to go unpunished?" Zethra hissed, his voice taking on a more dangerous edge. "Your human arrogance is unparalleled. You've been useful, but you're far too small, far too insignificant in the grand design of the galaxy. You overstep, Commander." Carter didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on his, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "This isn't about size or power. It's about respect. And you've underestimated humanity for the last time." For a moment, the tension between them was palpable. Zethra's cold stare seemed to pierce into her soul, but Carter refused to back down. She had come here for the truth, and she was determined to get it. "You've been playing a dangerous game," Carter continued, "but it's over. I'll expose your sabotage to the entire coalition. You won't escape this." Zethra's mandibles clicked, the sound like a low, ominous rumble. For a moment, Carter thought he might retaliate physically. But then, to her surprise, he leaned back slightly, his expression shifting from anger to something more calculating. "You think you can reveal everything you've learned to the coalition? How naive," Zethra said, his voice almost mocking. "Do you really believe your so-called victory means anything in the grand scheme? The coalition has already decided what place humanity will occupy, and it's not a position of power. Your interference is inconvenient." Carter's mind raced. He was right about one thing. Humanity's sudden rise had disrupted the delicate balance of power within the coalition. The others had seen it as a threat, and some had grown resentful of their unexpected success. But sabotage, that was something deeper. Humanity wasn't just being overlooked. It was being targeted. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" Carter said, her voice low but steady. "You and your allies want to ensure humanity doesn't succeed. You'll stop at nothing to make sure we fail." Zethra's mandibles clattered again, but this time it wasn't in anger. It was the sound of laughter, though it was cold and unsettling. "You still don't understand, do you, Commander? It's not just about your fleet, your petty victories. You represent something much bigger, a new force in the galaxy. Your kind, your species, could alter the balance of power. And that is what terrifies us." Carter felt a chill run down her spine. There it was, the truth. Humanity wasn't just being held back because of its size or power. They were a threat to the established order of the galaxy, and Zethra, along with his allies, had made it clear that they wouldn't allow humanity to rise. Not without a fight. But Carter wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She had come too far. "We'll see who's terrified when this is over," she said firmly. "You've underestimated us before, Zethra. That's a mistake you'll regret." The Zorath leader remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. He had clearly calculated the risks, but Carter could tell he didn't expect her to push this far. He may have held power, but there was something he didn't understand. Humanity wasn't going to roll over. They didn't just accept defeat. They fought. "Very well, Commander," Zethra said slowly, his voice filled with disdain. "You think you can win this battle. Perhaps you will, this time. But you've seen how quickly the balance of power can shift. Be careful how much you push. There are forces in play you do not yet understand." Carter's eyes narrowed. "I'm not afraid of whatever shadows you hide behind. We'll expose you. And when we do, the coalition will know the truth." Zethra's mandibles clicked once more, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor, something that hinted at his realization that he had just lost control of the situation. Carter could feel it. "Leave now," Zethra said coldly. "I've given you all the answers you'll get. But know this, humanity may not be so lucky next time." Carter turned without hesitation, signaling to her crew. She had what she came for, proof of the conspiracy, a glimpse into the dangerous game the coalition was playing. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. And now, more than ever, Carter was certain of one thing. Humanity's fight for its place in the galaxy was just beginning. As Carter and her crew returned to their ships, the weight of their confrontation with Zethra hung heavily in the air. The Zorath leader had been dismissive, almost condescending, But there was a dangerous undertone to his words. It was clear now that the sabotage wasn't just about crippling humanity's fleet. It was about a much larger struggle for control within the coalition. Once back on the bridge, Carter ordered her crew to begin analyzing the data they had gathered. The pieces were falling into place, but the bigger picture was still elusive. Who else was involved in this conspiracy? And how far would they go to stop humanity from rising? "We've got a problem," Lieutenant Harris said, breaking into Carter's thoughts. He was staring at his screen, his face pale. "It's worse than we thought. We've intercepted a transmission. Zethar isn't working alone. There's a larger faction behind all this." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Who?" The transmission came from a high-ranking member of the Korleth. Their ambassador, actually. It looks like they've been coordinating with the Zoreth to undermine humanity. The Korleth, a species of massive warlike beings, had always been a dominant force within the coalition. If they were involved in the sabotage, things were about to get far more complicated. The Korleth had a reputation for being ruthless and would stop at nothing to maintain their dominance in galactic politics. Carter's mind raced. She had known the coalition wasn't as united as it seemed, but this level of conspiracy was something else. There was no way humanity could sit idly by and wait for their enemies to strike. The sabotage had to be exposed, but the implications were even more dire. The entire coalition would have to take sides, and humanity's position was far from secure. "We need to act fast," Carter said, her voice resolute. "Harris, trace the rest of that transmission. Find out who else is involved and where this is coming from." As Harris worked, Carter turned to her second-in-command, Captain Ramirez. "Prepare the fleet. We need to be ready to move at a moment's notice. If the Korleth are involved, we might be facing more than just sabotage." Ramirez nodded. "Understood, Commander. I'll make sure we're ready to respond." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. The human fleet had already endured significant damage, and while repairs were underway, time was running out. The longer the saboteurs had to act, the greater the risk of humanity being pushed out of the coalition, or worse, being branded as a threat that needed to be eliminated. When Harris finally spoke again, his voice was laced with urgency. "Commander, I've tracked the transmission to a secure facility deep within the Korleth homeworld. They'd been operating under the radar for months, gathering support among other factions that feel threatened by humanity's rise." Carter's stomach sank. The Korleth were known for their tactical brilliance, but they were also a species obsessed with power. If they were rallying other factions to their cause, humanity could be facing an alliance of galactic powers united against them. "We can't let them consolidate their forces," Carter said firmly. "We need to send a message. Humanity will not be intimidated, and we won't back down." The plan was risky, but it was the only way forward. They couldn't simply confront the Korleth head-on without overwhelming force, and right now, the human fleet wasn't in a position to do that. But they had a chance to disrupt the coalition of enemies before it could fully form. "We'll make a strike," Carter continued, her tone unwavering. "We'll target the facility on the Korleth homeworld, take out their communications hub, and expose everything. It's the only way to send a clear message that humanity is here to stay." Captain Ramirez stepped forward. "What about the Zoreth and Korleth fleets?" "They'll retaliate." Carter met his gaze. "We can't afford to wait for them to strike first. We've already proven our strength once. It's time to show them we won't be pushed around." The plan was set into motion. The human fleet, battered but determined, prepared for the most dangerous mission they had ever undertaken. As they moved into position, Carter's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The risks were monumental, and failure meant the end of humanity's place in the galaxy. But there was no turning back now. As they approached the Korleth system, Carter stood at the helm of the flagship, her eyes focused on the holographic map that displayed the location of the target. A large facility, hidden within a jungle-covered continent on the Korleth homeworld, was the source of their enemies' operations. It was a well-guarded fortress, but it was the nerve center of their conspiracy. If they could take it out, They could cripple the entire operation. "Ready for the strike, Commander," Ramirez said, his voice steady. Carter took a deep breath. The future of humanity was about to be decided. This was their moment to prove once and for all that they would not be crushed under the weight of the coalition's politics. It was time to act. "Let's do this," Carter said, her voice full of resolve. "For humanity." The fleet surged forward, heading straight for the heart of the Korlev conspiracy. The battle for their place in the galaxy was about to escalate, and Carter knew that the fate of humanity rested on their next move. The human fleet surged toward the Korlev system, its engines humming with the anticipation of what lay ahead. Commander Carter stood at the helm of the flagship, her eyes glued to the holographic map of the Korlev homeworld. The jungle-covered continent where their enemies' operations were centered loomed large on the map. It was heavily fortified, but Carter had no intention of letting that stop them. "Commander," Captain Ramirez called out, breaking her focus. "We've entered Korlev space. The facility is still heavily shielded. We'll need to disable their defenses before we can get in close." Carter's mind raced, processing the information. Time was not on their side. The Korlev and their allies were bound to notice their approach soon, and every second they wasted could lead to humanity's downfall. There was no room for hesitation. "We'll do it quickly," Carter replied. "Disrupt their shields and communications first. We don't want them sending out any distress signals." The bridge crew worked in tandem, their hands flying over the controls as the fleet adjusted its course. Each ship in the human fleet had suffered damage from the previous sabotage, but the repairs were holding. Their stealth capabilities would be crucial here. If they could sneak past the outer defenses before the Korlev knew they were there, they would have a shot at hitting the heart of the conspiracy. The fleet arrived at the outer edge of the Korlev system, where the facility's complex shield systems spanned across vast stretches of space. Carter's fingers clenched into fists as she watched the readings on the screen. There was no way to sneak past. The Korlev were prepared for this kind of attack. They would need to go in with overwhelming force to stand a chance. "Launch the strike teams," Carter ordered. "We need to hit them hard and fast. No time for subtlety." The human fleet broke into smaller groups, each ship launching a series of high-velocity missiles that targeted key shield generators and communications arrays. The first salvo struck, and the shields around the facility flickered briefly before reasserting their power. It was a formidable defense, but Carter knew that humanity had the firepower to break through. "Direct hit on their outer shields, Commander," Lieutenant Harris reported. "Their communications network is down. They won't be able to call for reinforcements." Carter exhaled in relief but didn't relax. This was just the beginning. They had breached the first line of defense, but they were still a long way from the facility itself. The Korlev were not easily deterred, and the facility was no doubt swarming with their troops, ready to defend their operations. "We've got incoming," the tactical officer yelled. Korlev interceptors launching from the facility. Carter's eyes narrowed as the first wave of Korlev warships appeared on the radar. These ships were massive, built for sustained combat, and heavily armed. If the human fleet didn't stay on their toes, they would be overwhelmed in a matter of minutes. "Engage evasive maneuvers," Carter commanded, her voice calm but commanding. "We can't afford to get bogged down. Focus on disabling their engines and targeting their weapons." The battle erupted in a fury of laser fire and explosions. The human fleet danced through space with agility, launching torpedoes and blasting away at the Korlev interceptors. Every shot counted. One by one, the Korlev ships began to fall, their massive frames crumpling under the concentrated assault. Yet, the Korlev did not retreat. Instead, they pressed on, determined to defend their operation at all costs. Carter's flagship was engaged in a fierce dogfight with one of the largest Korlev warships. Its enormous cannons fired relentless blasts, forcing Carter to weave and duck behind asteroids and debris. Every instinct told her to retreat, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when they were so close. "We need to take out their main defenses before they can regroup," Carter said, her voice sharp. "Commander, I've located their central control tower," Lieutenant Harris called out from his station. "If we can target that, we'll cripple their entire operation." Carter nodded without hesitation. "Prepare a full salvo of missiles. All ships, target the control tower. Take it out, and we win this fight." The human fleet concentrated its firepower, launching everything they had at the central tower. A barrage of missiles and energy beams streaked through the void, slamming into the tower's defenses. The Korlath were desperately trying to protect their control center, but their efforts were futile. The sheer force of humanity's attack overwhelmed their shields, and the central tower erupted in a violent explosion, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Korlath fleet faltered. Their coordinated attack began to crumble as their command structure fell apart. Without their central hub, they were disorganized, vulnerable. The remaining Korlath ships, though formidable, were now at a distinct disadvantage. "We've done it," Lieutenant Harris shouted, a note of triumph in his voice. Carter allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile, but she knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Korlath were down, but they were not out. Their retaliation would come, and it would come quickly. "Captain, keep our fleet in position," Carter ordered. "We don't let up until every last ship is either disabled or destroyed. The Korlath will regroup, and when they do, we need to be ready." The battle continued to rage, but the human fleet held its ground. Slowly, the Korlath resistance crumbled, their warships falling one by one to the precise, unrelenting attacks of the human fleet. Carter could see the Korlath ships retreating, but they weren't going to give up that easily. "Commander," Captain Ramirez said, his voice steady, "we've taken out their main forces. The remaining Korlath ships are fleeing the system." Carter's heart pounded in her chest. "Let them go. We've sent them a message." But the war was far from over. Humanity had just struck the first decisive blow. As the human fleet regrouped, Carter knew that their victory today would echo through the coalition, and the Korlath, and everyone else who doubted humanity, would have no choice but to respect their power. The fight for the galaxy had only just begun. The remnants of the Korlath fleet scattered in retreat, leaving the human fleet standing victorious in the silence of space. The battlefield was littered with wreckage, the debris of both Korlath and human ships floating in the void. The flagship's hull had taken several hits, but nothing that would compromise its ability to fight. Carter stood at the bridge, watching as her crew worked to assess the damage and begin repairs. "Commander, the Korlath have flooded the system," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. "They're regrouping near their border. We've crippled their operations, but they'll likely be back, stronger, with reinforcements." Carter nodded. She knew the Korlath wouldn't simply allow this defeat to go unpunished. The battle was only a temporary victory. The real war was far from over, and humanity had made its first real stand against the galactic powers that sought to suppress them. "We've made a statement," Carter replied, her voice calm, though her mind was already calculating the next move. "The Coalition can't ignore humanity any longer. The Korlath will be back, but they won't be the only ones we have to face." The silence that followed was heavy. Despite the damage and the loss of life on both sides, there was a sense of pride in the air. Humanity had struck back, and for the first time, they had proven that they weren't just another weak species among the stars. They had shown that they were capable of holding their own against even the most powerful forces in the galaxy. But Carter knew that this was just the beginning. The Coalition, fractured as it might be, was powerful, and humanity had earned their ire. It was inevitable that the Korlath would seek retribution, but there were other factions in the Coalition who might feel threatened by humanity's rise as well. "We've got work to do," Carter said. "This victory has to be more than just a flash in the pan. We need to unite the factions who believe in humanity's potential. Show them that we are allies, not enemies. If we're going to survive, we need more than just strength. We need diplomacy." Captain Ramirez stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. "The Coalition will be watching. This could either push humanity into a position of respect, or it could make us a target for every faction that feels threatened by us. Carter turned to him, her gaze unwavering. We don't have the luxury of fear anymore. Humanity's destiny is on the line. We're either going to rise and take our place among the stars, or we're going to be crushed beneath them. There's no middle ground. We've got allies, Ramirez said, a quiet confidence in his voice. The Aetherians, the Regalians, and a few other smaller factions. They'll be with us. But we need to be strategic. One wrong move, and the Korlath might have reinforcements here in a matter of days. Carter exhaled slowly, her mind already racing through the possibilities. The Korlath would surely be making alliances of their own. Their pride would not let this defeat go unanswered. But humanity had something they didn't: resilience, ingenuity, and the determination to carve out a place for themselves in the galaxy, no matter the cost. We have one chance to make this work, Carter said, her tone steely with resolve. We take the next step. We play the long game. This victory is just the first chapter. The crew of the flagship fell into a steady rhythm, working tirelessly to ensure that the damage was repaired and that they were prepared for whatever came next. The Korlath may have been forced to retreat for now, but they would not rest until their vengeance was exacted. And yet Carter felt something stirring inside her, a sense of purpose, a vision for humanity's future that transcended mere survival. She had seen the immense power that the Coalition held, but also its fractures. The Korlath, the Zorath, and the other factions had their own ambitions, their own fears. Humanity had shown that it could disrupt their plans, but now it had to take that disruption and turn it into something more. A spark had been lit, but it was up to them to fan that flame into a fire that could change the galaxy. Commander, Harris interrupted her thoughts. There's a message from the Aetherian High Council. They're ready to talk. Carter's heart skipped a beat. The Aetherians had long been one of the most powerful and respected factions in the Coalition. If they were willing to meet, it could mean the beginning of a new alliance, one that could shift the balance of power in humanity's favor. Put them through, Carter ordered, her voice steady but full of anticipation. A moment later, the hologram of the Aetherian ambassador flickered to life. Tall, elegant, with shimmering skin that seemed to shift like liquid metal, the ambassador's gaze was cool but not unkind. Commander Carter, the ambassador said, a slight bow of respect in their posture. We've watched your victory. The Aetherians believe it is time for humanity to take its place among the stars. Carter's heart surged with hope, but she knew better than to get ahead of herself. This was only the beginning. We're ready to work with you, she said, her voice resolute. Humanity's future is in the stars, and we have no intention of letting anyone stand in our way. The Aetherian ambassador's expression softened, and Carter saw the first real glimmer of hope for her people in the ambassador's eyes. Then let us begin, Commander, the Aetherian said. Together, we will shape the future. As the connection ended, Carter felt a surge of determination unlike anything she had experienced before. Humanity had made its mark, and the galaxy had no choice but to take notice. But now, the real challenge began. This was their moment to rise, to take their place as equals in the galaxy. And Commander Carter would lead them to that future, no matter the cost.